Hello, my wonderful friends, and welcome back to the Live Label Free podcast. I'm your host, Livia Sara, an autism and eating disorder recovery coach that's on a mission to help you and your loved ones turn your mess into your message. So today we have an episode that I'm very, very, very excited for because I will be answering the question, are eating disorders a form of autistic masking? Now, I know what some of you may be thinking, because I thought the same, and that is, well, duh, they are. But per usual, my autistic brain has so many crevices of nuance up there, which, by the way, has actually been scientifically proven. Research has found significantly more folding in certain brain regions in autistic people, which basically means there's more neural tissue in a limited space. But anyways, that's a conversation for another day. Back to autism and masking. We're really going to peel back the layers in this episode, no pun intended. In fact, it took me a full week of hyper-focusing on scripting this episode because honestly, there's no way I would have been able to express the inner flow of thoughts as coherently as I'm about to if I didn't take the proper time to sit and write notes and organize notes and rewrite notes and, well, welcome to the life of an autistic author. Speaking of being an author and scripted episodes, I've been thinking about doing something for a while that some of my favorite author podcasters do, and they always give a brief life and book update at the beginning of their episodes, which, okay, honestly, I've been wanting to do, but haven't been doing because, dun dun dun, that will take up too much time. Because, oh my gosh, people, I always feel a ticking time bomb in my chest. The moment I wake up, my brain goes, oh no, it's 7 a.m. There's so much to do and there's just not enough time. But I made a big decision last week. Oh, and for context, it is Sunday, May 11, 2025, as I'm recording this. And yes, it is Mother's Day, and a very special Mother's Day, because I actually got to see my mom today and every day this past week. So if you've been following this podcast for a while, you know I'm from the Netherlands, and my whole family still lives there, while I have just been traveling the world and have finally settled in Northampton, Massachusetts, USA. So my mom and I, we only get to see each other like once or twice a year, depending on who's traveling where, and yeah, it was such a treat. So a lot happened this past week, which brings me back to my big decision. Honestly, I've been feeling this sense of rush, not enough time for a long-ass time. But sometimes there are days where it's so extra intense, and I literally feel like I am drowning in time. Yeah, try and even picture that. So last week, I literally had 4 days in a row where I could just feel myself running on the hamster wheel of decline. I could feel myself standing on the edge of a cliff of the burnout void. I was going to bed at like 3 a.m. and waking up at 8 a.m. And by the way, I'm someone who needs like 9 to 10 hours of sleep, and I was getting half because I was up writing my autism and anorexia book I mentioned in my most recent life update episode. And well, as you can imagine, after those 4 days, I literally felt like I was going to crack. So I took a deep breath, and I was like, Livia, you're not an octopus. You literally, physically cannot be working on 5, and as I'm saying this, sometimes it's even more than 5, different big projects at the same time. And it goes without saying, these are on top of this weekly podcast, my private and group coaching programs, not to mention just engaging in the daily project of living a life where one has to buy groceries, do laundry, eat, shower, and, well, you get the gist. So I told myself, Livia, you have to trust that doing one thing at a time will allow you to be more intentional, to create better quality work, or rather art, to make more of an impact with that art, and ultimately, perhaps even start enjoying this life a little bit. And using the word enjoy genuinely feels wrong in my body right now because I deal with anhedonia, which is the official term for an inability to experience joy or pleasure. I might have to do an entire episode on that in the context of autism and eating disorders. But anyways, coming back to this episode. Okay, so I know that doing one thing at a time decision sounds like a painfully obvious solution to getting off this hamster wheel I have created for myself. But if you're like me, if you're someone who's always thinking so freaking much that you feel like you're going to burst at the seams in this human body costume, to internalize this feeling of abundance is a huge freaking deal. And honestly, what's even more of a huge deal is how the universe just seemed to align for me after I made that decision on a Monday evening. Because the next morning, well, one of the amazing members of the Autistically ED-free membership, shout out to Elma if you're listening to this, wrote the most beautiful comment addressed to me in the community. Here's what she wrote. Please don't stress with getting the book out, and we were talking about my quasi-recovery book that I am so freaking excited for, by the way. She said, take your time. It's okay. You deserve taking care of yourself. One step at a time. It's okay to slow down and even be slow. We don't want you to burn yourself out. I look forward to reading the book, but I'm waiting patiently. And then I replied, honestly, Elma, your message landed at exactly the right time. I've been feeling so overwhelmed. There's so many books and projects and things I want to do, but I realize my mind thinks I have more capacity than my body. So indeed, slowing down really is going to be so helpful for me right now. After all, you cannot create to your maximum potential if you are in fight or flight mode all the time. Now, this whole conversation about wanting to do all these things, but your mind having more capacity than your body, is tightly intertwined with today's topic on masking, as you will soon hear. Which is honestly why I wanted to start doing these updates before the main episode once in a while, because then you can understand my life context that prompted me to create a specific episode at this specific time. Also, because many of you appreciate and enjoy my life update episodes more than anything because they are so spontaneous, I figured if I would just do more mini updates like this, even though this is becoming longer than just mini, you will know everything that's going on in my life on like a more frequent basis. And I think I will enjoy sharing personal updates even more because I'm not saving everything for like a giant brain dump after a year. I also never know where and when to insert those, hey, by the way, did you know about this book I wrote or this course I have or that there are coaching spots available when it comes to specific episodes. So I figured if I just become really raw and present for these introductions, I can just naturally share what's relevant in the moment, which is more fun for everyone. I feel like I'm in a really transformative period of my life right now, just, feel it in my bones. So to be more intentional, to really ask what I want rather than need to do, to operate from this place of trust and intuition and abundance, it just feels very aligned right now. So, obviously, I only ever want to do things on this podcast that you genuinely appreciate. Because honestly, my friends, that's exactly who I create this podcast for. I create it for you. If I could live in a bubble and everyone magically would know about my art without me having to be on the internet and promote stuff through this podcast and social media, I would just be writing my books all darn day. Speaking of which, in case you didn't know, I also write books about autism and eating disorders. You can find them all at livelabelfreebooks.com or on Amazon, of course. Anyways, because I create this podcast for you, do please let me know if you enjoy this format of the pre-episode updates and then the main episode, or if you'd prefer me to keep the updates separate, or if you don't even want to hear the updates at all. Or even if you have a totally different idea for the format of the podcast going forward, please let me know too. I'm a lifelong learner, so I love to hear from you. And like I've said before, it makes this podcast more of a conversation. You can contact me at livelabelfree.com/contact. So again, that's livelabelfree.com/contact. So now that I've shared the backstory of my future plans for the podcast, let's share what's been going on this week, aside from my mom visiting and the big decision, of course. Well, first, I decided to put the intense, focused writing of my autism and anorexia book aside for now because it was too much pressure on top of everything else I'm doing in my life right now. And oh my gosh, even as I'm saying this, I feel my demand avoidance kicking in, going, well, now that we don't have to write it anymore, that's exactly what we want to do. Well, welcome to the PDA brain, people. And this is also hilarious because this episode on masking that I'm about to read to you, because as I already disclosed, it is scripted, was originally written as a chapter for that book. So maybe that's just what I'm gonna do. I'll follow my inspiration, the content my soul is calling me to create, and I won't say it has to be for the book, or it has to be for the podcast, or it has to be for my email list, or whatever. And by the way, if you're not on my email list, you can get on it at livelabelfree.com/join. I just send like free content there. So if you enjoy this podcast and maybe you enjoy the content I post on Instagram, you'll love being on my email list. And that's also where I post announcements for the first time. So if I have new books or new courses or new programs or new coaching spots or anything like that, the first people to hear are the people on my email list. So again, that's livelabelfree.com/join. Now, back to the episode. I'm just going to write and create what my soul is calling me to do, and then I'll decide what I do with it. I'm just going to surrender, which I do have to say something now that I've mentioned the word surrender. Because people often ask me, what was the most important thing you did to recover from your eating disorder? And that word surrender always comes up. Because the most important thing I did to recover from my eating disorder was actually something I didn't do. That is to say, I surrendered. I stopped trying to control. I put my hands up in the air and I said, I can't do this anymore. I need help and I'm going to surrender to that help. So that's what I'm doing right now too. I can't control this body's physical capacities. As hard as it is, I can't expand beyond this costume, which is of course precisely why I always feel like I'm bursting at the seams. And again, as you will hear in this episode on masking, this is what the eating disorder helped, in big air quotes, helped me with. It helped me retreat from my own creativity and my own vastness. But the reason I put my autism and anorexia book aside is because alongside the new Autistically ED-free membership I started recently, which, by the way, come join us if you haven't already at livelabelfree.com/membership. This is an ongoing weekly group coaching program that's super affordable, and the topics and depth and vulnerability we dive into in our calls is truly indescribable. And as I just shared through the exchange with Elma, even the community helps me improve as a human. The symbiotic energy exchange and that deep soul just getting each other, well, like I said, there truly are no words to describe that feeling. Speaking of symbiotic energy and the importance of genuine understanding when it comes to healing from an eating disorder, especially when you're a neurodivergent being who feels misunderstood by the world at large, Live label-free one-on-one coaching spots are open. I believe I may have mentioned this in a previous episode, but I took a few months off private coaching to focus on moving, to focus on launching the Autistically ED-free membership, and I'm so excited to say that I finished recording the audiobook of How to Get Out of Quasi-Recovery. Along with continuing to write my books and focus on my projects, I am so excited to be doing more one-on-one work again. So if you or a loved one is currently struggling with an eating disorder and you want a 100% personalized roadmap to your unique version of freedom, I invite you to apply for private coaching with me at livelabelfree.com/coaching. While this podcast and my books and all my other content can definitely help you feel seen and come to certain insights, there's truly nothing more transformative than embarking on a person-centered journey with someone who's once been exactly where you or your loved one has been. Again, you can learn more about coaching and apply at livelabelfree.com/coaching. And the last update before we finally get into today's episode on eating disorders and autistic masking is my quasi-recovery book. Now that I have all the endorsements from my beta readers back and I finished the audiobook and the editing is almost done, it's time to finalize formatting, cover design, marketing materials, and then we're gonna get this book launched, and I'm so excited because damn, people, this is the most philosophical, nuanced piece of art I have ever created. And honestly, I had kind of hoped that the book was already going to come out in May, which is now, but because these things always end up taking longer than expected, I cannot yet promise a publishing date. But I do promise that it's going to be soon, people. And by the way, because early reviews are beyond helpful on launch day, I'm looking for a small group of dedicated listeners who would love to receive an advanced copy of the How to Get Out of Quasi-Recovery audiobook in exchange for a positive review on Amazon and Goodreads. So if that's something you're interested in, just send me a message at livelabelfree.com/contact and I'll get back to you with all of the details. I can only offer this to a limited number of people, so don't wait to reach out if you are interested. Well, I think that's enough for now. Again, please let me know if you enjoy my doing more updates like this before the main episode so I know whether I should keep going or to do something else. All feedback is welcome. And now, without further ado, let's dive into today's episode in which you'll learn how eating disorders manifest through 3 distinct types of masks, why neurodiversity-affirming approaches form the foundation of freedom, and how to discover your true self without the masks of fear and limitation. First of all, what is autistic masking? Masking is putting on a version of yourself that you think the world will accept. It's carefully studying how others act, how they speak, and then mimicking their behaviors, expressions, and even their emotions. You learn to smile when you're supposed to laugh when others laugh, and to suppress stim urges, all in an effort to avoid being labeled as quote-unquote weird. As I'm sure any neurodivergent person, diagnosed or not, can attest to, growing up in a neurotypical world is a frightening thing. On a deep soul level, you know you're different from everyone else, but you can't quite pin down why. You know your interests are different. You know your nuanced and philosophical way of thinking is far beyond the comprehension of your peers, and everyone seems to have been born with the rulebook on how to have social interactions, except for you. So what do? You adapt by taking on external identities, camouflaging like a chameleon in the rainforest and hiding in the shadows, all to protect yourself from being found out and preyed on, because perhaps there have been times where you did show your true self. But rather than the authentic version of you being respected and celebrated, you were made fun of. You were bullied and teased, which only proved how important it was for you to learn to conform. Despite believing that conformity is the only way to survive in this threatening and unpredictable world, your unique self is acutely aware of the fact that you can't truly conform. Conformity goes against your entire nature. Unfortunately, this masking isn't a choice. It's a survival strategy. When you've masked for long enough, you begin to lose sight of where the mask ends and where your authentic self begins. Obviously, pretending to be someone else is exhausting, but it seems safer than the alternative. When it comes to autism and eating disorders, this is often where the confusion starts. You live in a constant state of tension between who you are and who you feel you should be. The pressure to fit in feels suffocating, and the gap between your masked self and your authentic self grows wider. It's in this ever-growing void that the seeds of disordered eating behaviors don't only take root, but thrive. While autism is typically associated with the eating disorders anorexia and ARFID, which is short for avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, the reality is that autistic masking can manifest through any type of disordered eating pattern, including bulimia, binge eating, orthorexia, and all the other points that exist along what I have termed the adaptive eating spectrum, or TAES, TAES. What makes this relationship particularly complex is that eating disorders serve a triple masking function. They create an external mask, which is how we interface with society. They create an identity mask, which is how we hide from ourselves. And they create a compensatory mask. So think, if I do the eating disorder, quote unquote, right, I don't have to face the existential angst of being, quote unquote, wrong. Let me start by sharing my personal experience with the external mask. This one showed up in how I adhered to diet culture's rules. The eating disorder wasn't only a way to have clear boundaries in a boundless world, but it also offered a way to conform. After all, everyone else is on a diet too. This external masking through food and body gives us a socially acceptable way to blend in, to appear, quote unquote, normal in a neurotypical world's expectations. But there was also a deeper layer at work. This layer formed the identity mask. Although my eating disorder was never about the way I looked, starving myself made me feel like I could retreat into my own body like plasmolysis in a plant cell, both physically and mentally. Physically, I was no longer stretching the human body costume I've always felt trapped in, and mentally, I was numbed from the ceaseless thoughts, and my clients know I often describe my thoughts as going balls to the walls. And I was also numbed from a constant state of fight or flight mode, a constant state of wanting to rip my skin off and just fly into the air and the nothingness from which ultimately we all are born, right? Anyways, the identity mask became a numbing method, a way to hide from my own infinite, abundant vastness. Even when I was really ill, even when I was acutely aware that my behaviors weren't, quote unquote, normal, and that the way I looked was concerning in every way possible, there was always a sense of superiority. And I'm not just talking about the superiority that accompanies anorexia, the feeling better than everyone else because you're able to eat less and move more than them. No, I'm talking about the fact that I knew that when people thought whatever they thought about my gauntness or obsessive food and exercise behaviors, I knew that they weren't actually judging me. They were judging the mask that I was hiding behind, or rather, retreating from. And gosh, did I feel special because only I knew that. Only I knew that they thought that they were judging me, while in reality, they were merely judging my costume. It was my little secret. Now, it's worth noting that with or without the eating disorder, my body has always felt like a mask. Because let's be real, No physical vessel can house the infinite autistic being that has creativity far beyond physical form. It's similar to how words feel like a mask. As I write in my book about autism and anorexia that I've temporarily had to put aside, this is what I write in that book. Words will always fail me. They will never say exactly what I want to say. They will never encompass the breadth and depth of the explosion of energy I have inside me. Perhaps this is why alexithymia, while typically considered an inability to recognize emotions, may not be an inability or difficulty with emotions at all. Maybe it's that emotions themselves are labels, and thus they're another way to push the complex human experience into a box that, once again, the infinite autistic being can never fit into. So when we say alexithymia is a common experience amongst autistic people, might we actually be saying that our emotional experiences are too vast and nuanced to be contained by simple labels? The complexity of our internal landscape defies these predetermined categories, just as our being defies the confines of physical form. But hey, that's just my nuanced perspective. Anyways, moving on. This concept of a body as mask can manifest in a seemingly opposite way in those who struggle with binge eating. And no, I'm not talking about extreme hunger here. I'm talking about people who consistently overeat without compensating through restriction or overexercise. And I've done an entire 4-part series on autism and binge eating, so be sure to go back and listen to those episodes if you haven't already. I will, as ever, also leave the links in the show notes for easy access. And if you currently do believe you're developing binge eating disorder after a restrictive eating disorder, please do yourself a huge favor and grab a copy of my book, How to Beat Extreme Hunger. I will leave the link in the show notes, or if you want to type it into your browser, you can just go to livelabelfree.com/extreme hunger book. You can buy the book on my own website, livelabelfreebooks.com, or it's available on Amazon and other retailers like Barnes & Noble and Kobo and Everland, which is like a subscription service, and it's available in all formats, so paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Anyways, let's come back to this episode and talking about true binge eating and how that relates to autistic masking. So many of my coaching clients who lean more on the overconsumption side of the adaptive eating spectrum tell me that intrinsically they know their being is so infinite that any physical form feels like a trap. Yet they also tell me that they've always been okay in a larger body because it was an attempt to match their physical form with their internal vastness. In other words, the larger body had become the mask. But of course, because your internal form can never be made tangible, as that would defy the nature of being, it becomes an endless chase. Just like restriction is an escape from emotions, sensory overwhelm, the fear of being healthy, what have you, binge eating is its own kind of escape. The sensory input paired with the hyper-focus of eating and eating and eating and eating a bit more is all a way to numb. It's a distraction from reality. The reality that no matter what your body looks like, you're still trapped. And one specific client is actually coming to mind right now. She was severely overweight and told me she hated being in her body because she couldn't walk, everything hurt, she couldn't dance, she could no longer do the things she loves. She wanted to lose weight, but was terrified of settling at her natural body size because she was so afraid that people then would finally, quote unquote, see her. This example perfectly illustrates how the binge eating and the overweight body that comes with that is a dual mask. The secretive eating is a respite from the external masking, while the overweight body can simultaneously act as a mask for your natural body size. And I want to be clear here. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being in a larger body if that's your natural set point. The issue isn't about size, it's about intention. For this particular client, her relationship with food and body wasn't coming from a place of self-acceptance or body neutrality. Rather, her behaviors were driven by fear and the need to hide. The larger body had become another mask, another way to avoid being seen. Speaking of escape, that's really the root of the entire spectrum of adaptive eating experiences. I mean, arguably, the attempted escape is the adaptation itself. It goes without saying that this is exponentially important to understand in the context of autism. To give another personal example, my eating disorder, or rather my eating adaptation, was an escape from sensory overwhelm, existential angst, and the constant pressure to perform like a neurotypical person. A person I knew I never could be, no matter how hard I tried. Perhaps this is why eating disorders involve so much secrecy, which we also see with bulimia, right? The secretive nature is the respite from the masking, the trap door that no one knows exists except for us. It's behind this trap door, in the privacy of the behaviors, that we can finally stop performing for everyone else. So, thus far, we've talked about anorexia, orthorexia, binge eating, and bulimia, but what about ARFID? Well, in some regards, ARFID may be a response to masking in and of itself. For those whose ARFID is driven by a lack of appetite, this often stems from being in a constant state of fight or flight mode, a natural consequence of chronic masking in a neurotypical world. The fear of consequences can also stem from a history of masking. For example, I had one client who deeply disliked certain food textures but grew up in a household where eating everything on their plate was strictly demanded. When they finally left home, they developed ARFID. And this person also has PDA, which officially stands for pathological demand avoidance, or rather, pervasive drive for autonomy, which meant their ARFID became an attempt to reclaim their autonomy. It was a rejection of years of forced compliance around food. It goes without saying that the picky eating stigma also fuels masking, which is perhaps why so many people with ARFID prefer to eat alone. They don't want to be judged for their food choices, their eating pace, their texture preferences, or the countless other ways that neurotypical society has deemed their natural eating patterns as wrong or childish. And speaking of feeling judgment, let's talk about the compensatory mask. For many, just as it was for me, being quote-unquote good at the eating disorder was a way to compensate for feeling broken and wrong in this world. If you've read my book, Rainbow Girl, and I talk about this much more in my upcoming book, How to Get Out of Quasi-Recovery, you know my eating disorder started as an innocent mission to be the perfect healthy eater. This mission became my neurodivergent hyperfocus, and more than that, it became my existential purpose. While I personally never struggled with body image or feared fatness, I do have many clients that say they do. If you remember my mentioning it on my Unnecessary Calories podcast that I did a few weeks ago, the specific client whose conversation I based that episode on told me that her eating disorder is a way to make her presence more quote-unquote tolerable, and her eating disorder is a way to avoid giving others a reason to quote-unquote hate me. This obviously connects very deeply to rejection-sensitive dysphoria, where masking itself becomes a response to RSD. Being thin, just like following diet culture's rules, offers that false sense of quote-unquote fitting in, which is the same as trying to conform. It's a way to compensate for feeling fundamentally wrong in this world. So then, is it any wonder that making the decision to recover is so damn hard? To let go of these masks, external, identity, and compensatory, would mean opening yourself up to the possibility of judgment, shame, and a level of vulnerability that feels dangerous. You'd be losing not just one protective layer, but 3 interwoven shields that have kept you safe in a world that feels anything but safe. This is precisely why I prefer the term discovery over recovery, because finding freedom from eating disorders, or rather eating adaptations, isn't actually about recovering from anything. In reality, it's about discovering who you are without these masks of fear and limitation. It's about discovering who you are when you embrace your neurodivergence. Discovery means understanding and honoring your sensory needs. It means releasing judgment about when, where, and how you need to eat to feel safe. Sometimes this means eating alone, which tends to go against the traditional view of needing to learn to eat in social settings. The goal of discovery isn't to force neurotypical eating patterns onto a neurodivergent nervous system. Instead, it's about discovering your unique version of freedom, one that honors both the experience of being an autistic soul and the biological needs of the body that soul inhabits. This journey of discovery also involves a willingness to confront the existential parts within yourself. It's about learning to trust that people will see, respect, and love you for who you truly are, fully unmasked. And if they don't, well, those were never your kind of people to begin with. A majority of people are living in their own self-created stories of fear and limitation. They're hiding behind their own masks and believe that projecting labels and judgments onto others will make them feel better about themselves. But this is all an illusion. When you're truly free, you have nothing to prove. When you're truly free, you are your own foundation and will no longer need to compare yourself to others to feel whole. Thus, the path forward isn't about fixing what's broken, because you were never broken to begin with. Discovering your true self starts with acknowledging that your masks were an adaptation to help you navigate a world that wasn't built for the neurodivergent nervous system. When you understand that you are a highly adaptive being, one that is creative and abundant far beyond physical form, you invite yourself to adapt the other way, to adapt into the vastness that you were born to embody. And that is all I have for you today, my friends. If you enjoyed this episode, could you do me a quick favor and leave a 5-star rating and positive review for the Live Label Free podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you're listening? Or if you're listening on YouTube, drop a comment with your biggest takeaway or insights below. It helps other people to find the show so we can bring more awareness to this misunderstood connection of neurodivergence and eating disorders. And if you want more support on your own autistically ED-free journey, apply for one-on-one coaching with me at livelabelfree.com/coaching, or if you prefer to embark on your neurodiversity-affirming discovery journey in a group setting, come join us in the Autistically ED-free membership at livelabelfree.com/membership. I cannot wait to speak to you in real time, and otherwise, I'll talk to you in the next episode. Bye-bye for now.